Diego Cancel. I am the program coordinator for Dream and Green. We are a nonprofit here in South Florida with a mission to empower individuals, especially youth, to lead in the response to climate change and other environmental issues that we all face. We are looking forward to using this event tonight as a way to open a discussion with our community in order to help guide and evolve our school programs. Tonight, my co-moderator will be Julius, and I'm going to let him introduce himself really quick.
Hello, everybody. My name is Julius Goldberg. I'm an incoming junior at Miami Beach Senior High. I was involved with the Dream and Green program in middle school and got re-involved in it this year to help out.
Awesome. Thank you, Julius. So before we introduce our amazing panel tonight, I want to go over the flow of tonight's event just so that we're all on the same page. My co-moderator and I will be asking questions for all of the panel to answer. And as time is short, we ask you guys to take about 1 to 2 minutes per question. And with that being said, Maytal, if you could introduce our first panelist tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego and Julius. Good evening. My name is Maytal and I'm a Dream and Green board member. As a born and raised Israeli, as a Jew, one of our core values is the notion of tikkun olam, repairing the world. The concept that the pursuit of social and environmental justice is a responsibility of each and every individual. Mayor Dan Gelber has been engaged in tikkun olam throughout his career and long-standing public service. Prior to serving as mayor, during his service in the Florida legislature, throughout his numerous community activities. Private-public partnerships are one of the keys for environmental justice. Our community is fortunate to have Mayor Gelber as a leader and as a partner. And for that, I was eager to have Mayor Gelber join this meeting and was so delighted that he accepted our invitation. Thank you, Mayor Gelber.
Happy to be here.
Jessica, if you could introduce our next panelist.
Good evening, my name is Jessica Payne and I am one of Dream and Green's newest board members. I would like to introduce you to Tina Brown, the CEO of Overtown Youth Center. Tina is a role model to myself and so many others working with students and parents in Overtown. She has a passion for positive change in the community that is contagious. Please give her a warm welcome.
Alexandra?
Hi everyone, I'm Alexandra Barrera and I'm a board member of Dream and Green. I'm excited to introduce Daniela Tagtachian. Daniela brings a strong background in the higher education space and experience in the environmental justice clinic at the University of Miami. I understand she is passionate on these issues and I know she can bring an insightful and unique perspective to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jesse Rittenhouse. I am the chair of the board of directors for Dream and Green. I'm very happy to have everyone attend tonight and be a part of this. I would personally like to introduce Sterling Laylock. Sterling is a man who cares about the environment, communities, and people. I have seen how he cares through his work as a sustainable business consultant and entrepreneur that brings solutions for environmental issues to municipalities and businesses through his volunteer work and leadership at the U.S. Green Building Council and through his mentorship to many people, including myself. He has a great understanding of both environmental and social justice. I am proud to call him a friend and a colleague in the effort to make this world a more sustainable and equitable place. Sterling also understands that speaking up about sensitive topics isn't always the popular thing to do, but it must be done. For these reasons, I would like to introduce you to Sterling Laylock as one of our esteemed panelists for this evening's town hall.
Thank you very much for having me. And when Jesse invited me, I wouldn't miss it for the world. And I think that a lot of the things that we all have been sort of thinking about and not necessarily engaging in are now in front of us, where everyone has to be a bit of an entrepreneur because things have changed.
Awesome, thank you. So last but not least, I would love to introduce Barbara Martinez-Guerrero. She is the Director of Dream and Green. Barbara?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, first of all, to our panelists for joining us today and to our participants as they're coming in. You know, I feel like environmental justice is such an important issue, and me being a teacher, having spent a lot of my years in public schools, that it's a really important to tackle when we talk about how to reach equity for our community. So I'm glad you're all here, and I can't wait to hear from our wonderful panelists today.
Awesome. So before we get started, I just wanted to let every panelist know, as I said, please answer every question 1 to 2 minutes. And if you guys could tell us a little bit about yourself before you answer for that first question, that would be awesome. So Julius, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for the wonderful introductions. Our first question is this: what does environmental justice mean to you? Talk about your experience with the topic.
And anybody feel free to jump in.
So hi, I will start first. My name is Tina Brown. I am the CEO of the Overtown Youth Center. Overtown Youth Center is a youth development organization that is designed to bridge educational, social, emotional health and opportunity gaps. I grew up in Overtown, and what environmental justice means to me is ensuring that we are tackling the issues specifically that affect urban communities, such as housing, homelessness, and making sure that there are equity in decision-making around our community so that we ensure that our students, our families are safe in the communities in which we serve.
Awesome, thank you.
I might add to that, that in so much as we think about justice, we also have to reach out to folks that are not on the short end of the stick of justice to speak up for those that they know who are getting the end of the stick. Because we seem to have a tendency that if something is not happening to me, then it's not happening.
Right.
And now we could see in the COVID crisis or any kind of crisis, it doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, how rich you are, how smart you are, how not smart you are, it's going to impact everyone in an arbitrary way. And these are the kinds of things that should cause us to galvanize together. And I believe it's all happening to be one big giant example of what really needs to happen to catapult our lives into the future.
I would just say that for me, I'm the mayor of Miami Beach, and I've lived in this community my entire life. And the community has really transitioned from one that probably didn't think a whole lot about the environment to one that has. But there's although environmentalism and environmental justice are very related, they're not exactly the same thing. And what's happening, I think now, and in my community is seeing a little bit or a good amount of it, is as we come to terms with, as we sow our environmentalist oats, so to speak, as we worry about things that we ought to be worrying about, the question really becomes, what are some of the unintended consequences of those actions? How do you make sure that environmental policy is promoting fairness and not actually creating inequities? And even in a city like mine, I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, that you can actually see those issues present themselves. And it's actually interesting because, of course, there's no central governance over environmental policy. Some of it comes from federal government, some from the state, and some, frankly, from the private sector and local government. So it's not as simple as a lot of other areas where there's only one, in the social justice where there's only one groups that do redistricting because there's only one place you can go to the Justice Department. There's only one group that here. It's a very asymmetrical oversight and initiatives. And therefore you've got to figure out really almost in each instance what the unintended consequences might be, ones that are good and ones that are troubling.
I could add to that. So hi, my name is Daniela Tagtachian. I'm a poverty lawyer, a community lawyer, and a social justice activist. Until recently, I was a fellow and a lecturer for the Environmental Justice Clinic at the University of Miami School of Law. and I'm currently a doctoral student at in the sociology program at CUNY. I wanted to provide a definition, at least the one we operated with, for environmental justice. Different people define EJ in different ways, and I think, at least from a lawyer's perspective, you always have to give a definition to make sure that we're all on the same page. So for me, what is EJ? EJ is the right to a safe and healthy environment, and that comes from environment being natural in terms of contamination, air, water, soil, or built, such as municipal equity, access to jobs, poverty issues, things of that nature. And this is regardless of wealth, race, ethnicity, color, religion, national origin, anything, right? Everybody has this right. And so from a legal perspective, as the mayor was saying, really EJ operates in the center of a lot of spaces. It operates in the middle of public health, poverty law, civil rights, environmental laws more generally, and that's kind of the space that EJ operates in.
Awesome. Barbara?
So to add on to that, you know, that's why there's the legal definition and then there's the definition that people understand. And sometimes when you say environmental justice, it's very closely related to so many things, including climate justice, which is very much tied, but there's a little bit of a difference. And so for me, environmental justice, when it relates to education, it can mean a bunch of different things. You know, it can mean, are we looking at where we're building schools, the school building itself, what we're providing in terms of, you know, healthy foods for the students that might live in food deserts, as we have some communities here in Miami-Dade County. So there's that personal kind of definition to what is an environmental justice. You know, do I have access to walk to school, or do I have to take a bus because the school that I'm, you know, all of a sudden aligned, you know, it's a little bit further away. So we feel that's why we wanted to have this conversation, because, you know, there's a lot of different interpretations, and then at how it relates to both the school itself in terms of the building, and also the students themselves and how they're affected by it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you guys for sharing. So actually for this next question, I want to put Julius on the spot as a student. I would love to get your perspective first, and then panelists, if you guys can join in answering this question. So what role do schools play in addressing environmental inequalities? And how do you think that impacts you and your fellow classmates as students?
Well, I believe schools must educate students about environmental justice and offer them opportunities to support their community and others in need. Earlier this month, I reached out to Miami Beach Senior High, Mast Academy, and Ransom Everglades to gauge students' overall awareness of environmental justice. Of those who had not been involved in either an environmental class or activity, only 42% had heard of environmental justice. On the other hand, 86% of actively involved students marked that they were aware of environmental justice. For this reason, schools should encourage students to join environmental science classes and environment-related clubs. One way to greatly increase student participation is by offering community service hours for in-school meetings and outside programs. Another way to raise awareness is to incorporate environmental justice into related classes curriculums, such as biology and human geography. This way, more students will be exposed to the concept of environmental justice and empowered to join environmental programs and organizations where they can make a difference in their communities.
Awesome. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's amazing that at such a young age, you're already conducting amazing research, and what you just said is really interesting. So thank you so much for sharing, and I'll ask the rest of the panelists if you guys want to jump in.
I think that we really should take a step back and talk with young people a lot more, because they know. You know, one of the cheat sheets I'll tell you that I normally do when I'm involved in a very complicated, sometimes heated and sensitive consulting arrangement, I talk to grade school children, and I just phrase the question so they'll understand what needs to happen. And every single time they know the correct answers. And people think it's funny, but they have a clarity. And if you notice, sometimes the objections that we get from adults are sort of 4 and 5-year-old objections to things. And they don't think that maybe I should step back and, sort of reevaluate what I'm saying here. Because by and large, people don't understand that the environment is the economy and the economy is the environment. They're not two different things. They're just intertwined to a point where we simply have to learn how to count all over again, because a lot of things that count aren't counted, and a lot of things that are just not counted count. And people scratch their heads and say, what do you mean? Because there's a behavioral economic aspect to things. And we really don't have our arms around that. And that's one of the things that could start in school with creative homework where your parents have to help you, because it's difficult to teach adults. But of course, the homework has to get done. And at least parents and grandparents, they'll participate in that. And that's how you can get the real information in front of them.
So I'd like to chime in. And Julius, thank you for your response. I work in an urban community, and I was talking to a couple kids the other day, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this panel discussion on environmental justice. What do you know about it? And surprisingly, the students that I was talking to, they didn't quite understand what environmental justice was. But I think that in an overall sense, we talk about environmental justice on a daily basis. We just don't coin it as environmental justice, right? So how do we create comparisons and educate in a manner that people can relate to the topic? And so in Overtown, for those of you who are from Miami and know Miami, I myself had to reflect back on, what is a pivotal moment in the history of a community that I grew up in that was synonymous with environmental justice or an injustice, however you want to see it. And I thought about the expansion of I-95. And so when Mayor Gelber talks about just unintended consequences, well, we all saw what happened as it relates to the expansion of I-95. It ravished that community. Tens of thousands of people moved out. As a result, poverty set in. And when kids talk about on a daily basis in Overtown, why are there no Publixes in our neighborhood? Why isn't there a Winn-Dixie? Why do we have to shop at the corner store? Why is there no Starbucks in our community? Or when you talk about things like farmers market, they don't quite understand that pivotal moment in history affected their ability to live and to have access to healthy and safe environments. And so I had to actually break that down for one of our students. And I'm like, just think about what happened to Overtown. And we talk about this all the time. So I think in terms of education, it is a matter of us breaking down, coining this phrase to be what it is. It is about environmental justice and making the comparisons. When people talk about Flint, Michigan, they don't always associate that to environmental injustice. But if we can make those comparisons for students, I think that they'll get it. And if we can ingrain the environmental justice term in educating our community from a historical perspective, I think we're doing our jobs in making them more conscious of environmental justice.
So that was great, Tina. It made me think about how I prepared for this. I asked my oldest child, who just graduated Tufts, what she knew about environmental justice. I was just sort of wondering. She sort of looked at me like I was an idiot and said, I took a course in environmental justice. It was my favorite course at Tufts. And I said, so what do you think? She started talking to me about it. And this is the same child who, when I became mayor, demanded that our city go plastic free to the extent we were allowed to under Florida law, which we did, and start a program. But with regard to education, it's very interesting because there's an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity is obviously, as part of our plastic free campaign, we took a bunch of cutlery that's sort of wooden or bamboo, and we gave it to elementary school kids. And we had them keep track of how often they were not using plastic and how much they saved. and we offered the ones that did the best a pizza party and a tree we would plant in the school. Of course, we gave the pizza party and the tree to all of them, but there's nothing that motivates a group of kindergartners more than the prospect of a pizza party, even though they have it all the time. In school, it's that kind of thing. And I started to get mostly questions and compliments from parents, a couple complaints when they said, you know, when I went out to dinner the other night, my daughter, who's in 3rd grade, demanded that we not have any plastic straws at the table. And so I want to thank you for that. Or what the heck's wrong with you for proselytizing my child about plastic straws? But the point is that for these kids, don't ever underestimate just how much they will learn something quickly at a young age, and it will become ingrained in their minds forever. So the opportunity is to do that. We have a STEAM program where we're delivering arts from our art groups as part of the STEAM program in our feeder pattern. It's a pretty cool program, and a lot of it is sort of environmental stuff. The challenge, though, of delivering these kinds of academic opportunities and amenities is that the school system in Florida will treat it like as an unnecessary amenity. And that's a real challenge because our schools have become testing factories. And obviously, if it's not part of the standards, then then it doesn't affect the school grade, and it's sort of lost in the ether of things that don't matter. And that's the challenge here. You've got to, fortunately in our county, we have a very progressive-minded school superintendent, but you're still going to have to figure out how to deliver it into the school system in a curriculum that is grade specific and that actually does something. And that I haven't really seen. Our STEAM program, we basically took all of our arts, the ballet, the New World Symphony, the bass, all of our museums and cultural, and many more now are involved, like the Perez, and we had them start to teach the STEAM courses through art and culture. So the ballet was teaching math, the bass was teaching science, and it was just very interesting to use art as the conduit for the teaching. But this is the kind of thing that I think fits into that, but it is not easy to deliver that curriculum into a feeder pattern, into a school system that, you know, has 400 and something schools and is the 4th or 3rd largest in the country. So that's the challenge, but I think it's worth it.
So one thing that came to mind for me is we were talking about Overtown. I don't know how many of the audience is familiar with Overtown as Miami and generally. There might be people from all over the states. Something that came to mind is that a baby born in Overtown has a 15-year life expectancy gap to a baby born in Brickell Key, which is less than 5 miles away. And I mentioned that as the segue to what I think the relevancy of schools are, right? So it's at home, students learn family values, right? Individual values that come from their parents or from whomever is within their household. So that's what happens at home. What are schools for, right? In addition to teaching students different things, schools are also how we socialize students, right? How we instill the values in students that are social values, right? So why is this relevant to addressing inequality? Well, because students learn to care about protecting the most vulnerable in society and how to actually address systemic inequality, structural change, all of this within the school system, or at least they should, right? So the 4 things I think that are necessary in the school system to be able to effectively deal with environmental injustice would be 1, people need to be provided with information, right? So students should get informed and educated about historic and present environmental injustices, right? 2, empathy needs to be taught. So students should be taught and encouraged how to be empathetic so that they actually care about the plights of the most vulnerable in society. 3, critical thinking needs to be taught because if you don't know how to address a problem critically, right? If you don't know how to do that analysis, you're not going to be able to identify the root cause of the problem, and you're not going to be able to come up with the appropriate solution to deal with that problem. And lastly, I think we should encourage students and teach them how to be imaginative thinkers. And by that, I literally mean we need to focus on imagination in a way, because in order to devise a better world, students need to be taught how to dream of a better world. And this may sound a little cheesy, but thinking of a better world and the solutions for it often requires thinking of a solution that we haven't seen yet. So if we don't have these 4 pillars, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Daniela, you are absolutely correct,
Thank
without a doubt. And one of the things I could tell you is when we look at the institution of public school, changing it is a long-term effort. But we can do things to augment and fill in where they're falling short. One example I can give you is I spend a lot of time in Southeast Asia. And in Southeast Asia, the equivalent of the US Green Building Council is the Singapore Green Building Council. The big difference is it's part of the government. And I was talking to them and I said, you know, design thinking is really, really, really important because it causes people in the community to become part of the solution. And all they really have to do is be interested in it. They don't have to be an engineer. They don't have to be an architect. They don't have to be a mathematician. They don't have to be a PhD or rocket scientist or a famous person or an influential person. Everyone can do their part because it's created as a process. And I said, you know, it would really be cool if you did something where you had a citywide design thinking competition. Because the big problem is solutions that are happening in more affluent areas are deployable in less affluent areas because it's not about money. It's about having a program with a delivery system. 12 months later, Singapore did a design thinking session with a competition for the whole city. And now you say, well, it's Singapore, so why couldn't we do that? Let me tell you, they have 280 square miles. Miami-Dade County alone is over 1,800 square miles. And even if you take that and take a third of it off and say, well, that's the Everglades, their population is the same as all of South Florida. And they have 280 square miles. And I already told you, Miami-Dade is over 1,800, and you're still talking about Broward and Palm Beach. We simply have to decide how to decide and to say that this is something that we want to do. Because guess what? Kids from Overtown will become friends with kids from Aventura, and kids from Aventura will become friends with kids from South Miami. And then guess what? They'll know each other for a long, long time. You see? So we can do these things. We just have to simply decide that this is something we want to do. We think about, you know, today's sponsor, Ecovy. Bob Drew is into water. I also know that he's the proud owner of a hedgehog named Q, but that's Koo, which is a different thing. So if we chose a school and we did some advanced things that reduce the runoff of all the stormwater that takes all the fertilizer to go down the storm drain untreated into Biscayne Bay, hence my virtual background, and had children involved in it because there's science, there's math, there's history, there's sociology, there are all the things going on. And how to do it, how to take a school and make it better could be a design thinking session. Because the students love their school and they spend the most time at school. And that, I think, would be a great place to start because it really just requires time and a vision, and it's not very difficult to do, and adults can be involved as well.
And just to build on that, I thank you, Sterling, because yes, that's exactly, I think, what we need. We need to engage our students in critical thinking. And, you know, the movement that through Dream and Green that we try to promote is this green schools movement to not only take a look at the building, but all of the systems that go, you know, the educational component of it with curriculum, integration, having the students build a sense of ownership of their school by doing, you know, energy audits and water audits and looking at what their schoolyard and seeing what improvements they can make, either building a garden or a butterfly, you know, a butterfly garden. I think that all of those, you start with that young. The issue, I think, is that sometimes we focus a lot on the elementary building like a general knowledge of things. And it's only until you get to the middle and the high school that you get more specialized content. And sometimes the content of what is environmental justice, you don't necessarily even get unless you're in a class that is an environmental science class that talks about it, or that defines it, or gives examples. So I feel like that idea of having students be more involved in these concepts at the current with current events that are happening, and that connection between schools. I mean, Miami-Dade County has the 4th largest school district, so it is very difficult for students to meet each other if it's not at a sporting event, if it's not at a football game, or if it's not at a very specialized competition that like the math bowl or something like that. But we need to kind of build a more interdisciplinary curriculum, so that, if you're into science, you're also going to get some of the arts, like Mayor Gelber said, that kind of STEAM bringing in to the student, so they're not just focused on one, but get these concepts and how it's related to them and what they're interested in.
That's great, Barbara. Thank you. And actually, before we move on to the next question, just to expand on that a little bit, just as an educator, you have so much experience both with Dreaming Green, but also as a teacher before that. How would you say you've seen, or what type of impact have you directly seen that has had on students in terms of when you see a school that integrates environmental programs, as opposed to a school that has never had environmental programs or just doesn't take the time to integrate those?
I mean, it's very difficult because it depends on the school. It depends on, the teacher that wants to take on, our schools have a very limited time that they have to explore things outside the curriculum, just because of the way, we have testing. And we need to have our students perform at a certain level. And so sometimes other soft skills go along the wayside. And so again, it goes back to Daniela's point where we need to teach empathy. And so how do you do that? How do you teach somebody to care about somebody that is not themselves or their immediate family? And that's tough.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Julius? I'm going to go to the next question, Diego, but I want to expound a little bit on what Barbara said. I know that we talk about the challenges of the school day and the restrictions that they have. And sometimes some of these projects are not possible. But I think that we should also think about community-based organizations infusing environmental justice programs in some of the community-based programs, like Overtown Youth Center, Big Brothers Big Sisters. And also, too, how do we educate parents as it relates to how to educate their children in the homes and how to care more about the environment and things like that. So I feel like there are multiple ways to educate our children outside of MDCPS. And I think that we should all just kind of start this movement about how do we do this as a community.
And there is summertime.
Yes, and there is summertime.
And they need things to do.
And they need things to do, exactly.
And the schools are vacant.
Programs, and there are, and in this virtual space, I feel like there are so many opportunities to reach so many kids and educate them on these types of topics. And it also, too, it really makes these kids well-rounded. Outside of the educational space, it gives them something to look forward to that's very different than just traditional studies. So I love your idea, Sterling, of challenges and these types of design thinking projects. Kids, if you're working with kids, you know that kids love hands-on projects. And I think environmental justice is a perfect way to give them hands-on opportunity while saving this planet that we live on.
Yeah,
that's right.
Awesome. Julius, you want to give us our next question?
By the way, everybody's answers were very eye-opening. Like, for example, I'd never even heard of the effects that I-95 had on other parts of South Florida. So Thank you all for sharing.
Julius, now you have to go and do some research, because you'll be stunned as it relates to the unintended consequences of expanding that expressway.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, our third question is, what is your hope for the future in regards to tackling environmental justice?
Well, my hope, which actually I'd like to transform into a mandate, is that there is a way to require people to know some basics as a prerequisite to something that they want. Because there are so many times that you may bring up something that you know about. And of course, there's everything to know, and then there's what we know, which is really a little tiny speck of a micro dot compared to the entire world. While at the same time, we really have to cause there to be some exposure to the impact of things. Because, you know, we could simply say, well, you know, in schools or in office buildings or in our homes, the indoor air quality is really bad, and we know that as a fact, and then we ignore it. Now we're dealing with the COVID pandemic, and now indoor air quality is all the rage. And then we look at Biscayne Bay, and we're depleting the oxygen in the water, and it is the blue-green algae is running rampant, and the average person in our city doesn't really know what that is. They just know that the water is not that clear anymore. And of course, reversing that from all of the studies that I've read, if it goes past the tipping point, which is very close, it could be up to 20 years before it's corrected. And then it's too late. And you'll have economic ramifications, health and you know, human life ramifications, and all these things, simply because people don't know. And half of people, if they were made a bit more aware, they would change their behavior and go along peacefully, and then you could focus on the other 50%. But they just really just don't know.
Yeah.
I'll advance Sterling's thoughts a little bit further and say that, you know, I think there's no question that our society is at sort of one of those, I don't know if it's a tipping point, but it certainly is it's a point of both conflict and awakening. And it's somewhat generational, it's economic, it's racial, it's social, it's got lots of fault lines. But what is most interesting about it is that a lot of those fault lines just percolated without anybody knowing they were there. And nobody really even, you know, just sort of accepted it. It was institutional, and it was both overt and subtle and implicit. And it covered so many things in almost everybody, but it's just sort of the way it was. And all that stuff has been sort of bared in the last year or two, and maybe even in the last few months. Because the one thing about this, the COVID challenge is it has sort of put people together in places that, you know, in thinking about things in a different way. So it's almost a confluence of both those things. So for me, I'm 100% certain that in, you know, and it's exciting that in 10, 20, and 30 years, a lot of the template of the social justice movement, whether it's environmental justice, social justice, racial justice, all of the justices are going to be in a different place, only because I know my kids, and I know that they don't see the world in the same lens, and they certainly don't even see the things that I've seen. So I know that's going to change, but I think the challenge is to make sure that that template is informed. And that's a hard thing to do, but it's a real opportunity to do it. So I think, apropos to what Sterling just said, it is really about trying to educate sort of not just decision makers, but I would argue far more importantly, the ultimate decision makers, people. Because, you know, I've been in this office, I was in the legislature, in the House and the Senate for 10 years, and I worked in the US Senate as a staffer. People tend to get the government they sort of deserve, and it's usually, if it's bad, it's because they're not informed. Knowledge is the equalizer for almost everything. And so for me, if we can educate a generation or two about these concepts and give them what this really comes down to, which is a longer view of their environment. And I don't mean just longer in terms of time, but I mean wider in terms of impact, that, you know, you might see in the long term, these kinds of policies becoming just sort of who we are, intrinsically what we do. You know, our little plastic-free experiment on the beach has worked pretty well. We're not arresting anybody. We're not, but we're getting a lot of compliance. And most of the compliance is because most of the restaurants said, yeah, this isn't so hard. We'll do it voluntarily. And if you can get that sea change in perspective with people, then it grows. And it's an opportunity because people, I think, they may be fighting a lot of what they're hearing about now, but they're certainly hearing about it, which is a lot better than it was 10 or 15 or even 4 or 5 years ago when it wasn't discussed. So this is a time, this is an awakening in America. And I think injecting environmental justice as a very legitimate and important, you know, road for people is critical. And I think, by the way, what we talked about a moment ago with education makes incredible sense to me. My daughter looked at me like I was an absolute idiot when I said, what do you know about environmental justice? For her, it was sort of something she just thinks about on a regular basis. And for me, it was something I was really thinking about in anticipation of this Zoom meeting. So so that's going to be the difference in our society. And I think it's great, but I think you've got to really exploit the moment, because it's a very exploitable moment in a good way.
Yeah, going back.
I just want to say one little thing that I think is going to be a workable solution, and it is effective public service announcements. Because a long time ago in a land far, far away, and Mary Gelber, you probably remember this one, when we had lead in paint. And kids were eating paint chips off the wall because they eat everything. And we had the Pinka balloon. And it was a simple black and white cityscape and this pink balloon that would float all over the city and tell kids not to eat paint chips. So when you think about viral videos, you think about young people, they make the best content.
Right.
And if we picked some topics, had a contest, and of course, Mayor Gelber, even, you know, no plastics and no straws, the kids could come up with the most amazing viral public service announcements that could be from Miami Beach, and then of course shared with other municipalities, and you'd have a movement across the city, and then it wouldn't simply be one part of the city doing something, and people would be able to participate.
It sounds to me like you want us all, and the youth especially, to start making some TikTok videos.
Absolutely.
Sounds like,
Some catchy TikTok videos.
That's
Did anybody else have anything to add for the future?
I wanted to add one thing. So I thought a lot about this question, as in I thought a lot about all of the questions, but this one I paused on for a little bit longer. In terms of the future, for me at least, I actually wanted everybody to just do their part. And I know that sounds a little weird, so I'll explain it a little bit more. I think there's something that motivates each and every one of us. And I want to encourage everybody to figure out what their theory of social change is. A well-crafted theory of social change is necessary regardless of where your passion lies, right? Whether you want economic empowerment of low-income communities, the success of children in foster care, increased resiliency to climate change for a municipality, wherever your interest is, right? Everybody has different interests. But regardless of where your passion lies, I would ideally hope for a future where people figure out their theory of social change. And one easy way to go about it is to think about these 3 questions. 1 is, what are you passionate about changing in the world? 2 is, what is the cause of that which should be changed, right? So what's causing that problem? And then 3, what are the concrete actions that are necessary to make that change be a reality? These 3 questions come together in a very concrete way when you think of, for example, police brutality, right? Obviously, this is a very relevant issue. It's also an EJ issue because EJ is everything. So we also have to remember that. It's a matter of inequality, therefore it's a matter of EJ. But what is the real cause of police brutality? Is it that the cops are militarized in their training? Is it that they have access to weapons? Is it that the rest of society has access to weapons, so they engage with people assuming they have weapons? Is it just racism? Is it implicit bias? Depending on what you think, is it civilian oversight that's missing? Is it a lack of accountability, right? The answer might be it's all of them. But to you specifically, what do you think the real cause is, right? And depending on what you think the cause is what the necessary steps are to fix that problem. Because for each of those veins, the steps that are necessary to fix it are different. So I ideally, in the future, to tackle environmental justice, would want everybody to do their part. Follow your passion, figure out what you want to change in the world and how to do it, and stay true to that. And it could be tiny and it could be big. You don't need to drop everything you're doing to take up the mantle of being a social justice warrior. That's not necessary. If you want to do that, by all means, I support you as well. But if you don't want to do that and you want to do something small, like supporting minority local businesses, great, right? Or figuring out what vendor you're using for your random event, right? So that's my hope for the future.
And so I'd like to build on what Daniela just said and bring it to the schools. I feel like in the context of schools, it needs to be education. It not only needs to be focused on the curriculum and the math and science, it needs to be focused on a more interdisciplinary. And so actually one of the comments we received is can in the environment be that interdisciplinary connector? And I definitely think that it is because, you know, you talk about, you know, the environment has so many aspects to it that it is, you know, not only about finding your voice, you know, and showing people how you feel about the environment, but it's also science. What is the technical aspect of, you know, the cycle of life and all of that comes with it. It's about buildings, you know, we talk about green buildings. How do you construct your man-made buildings so that they are in tune with the environment and the people, not just serve people. So I think it's about knowing how that environment can connect us all and how, like you said, environmental justice is everything and it can be connected to all of our issues, and to make sure that students make those connections, because again, you know, that is our role as educators, is to help guide students to make the connections that they might not necessarily see right away.
Awesome. Thank you, Barbara. So for this last question, actually, I wanted to let all participants know we're going to be sending out an email with additional resources. So it's related to this. That's why I bring that up. So Julius, would you take it away with our last question? And we don't have too much time, so if you guys could keep your answers really short. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. The last question is, what immediate steps can anybody take in their community to help in regards to environmental inequalities?
So I'll start. I think for me, it starts with the education of what is environmental justice. I think, again, when I started this conversation in explaining that when I broached this subject with some of our students, they didn't even know what environmental justice was, but they talk about it on a daily basis. So I think for me in my community, it's educating students on the subject area of environmental services and implementing projects, just as Sterling talks about, so that they can have some experiences with, you know, with environmental justice and understanding it at a greater level. I think that, again, going back and explaining some historical events that have taken place and taking a look at their neighborhoods and helping to make those connections, as Barbara mentioned, is going to be the first step to kids really owning and understanding and wanting to make some changes that in fact that they are passionate about. So that's definitely an immediate next step or an action that I like to take in my own organization.
To me, I think in issue advocacy, one of the most important things, it's not the most, but it's certainly in the top tier, is to put a face on something. And so for me, I feel like if you want people, and I'm someone who's, people try to I've advocated for things, and I've been advocated too as mayor. And when somebody is able to put a face on it, to take an issue and to organize around the issue, you know what's happening at that moment. You can feel it. You can feel, you know, when there's an inequity. So what I would say is, what you can do is find something that is understandable, digestible, that presents an inequity that needs to be righted and that needs to be addressed, and advocate for that. Because you can talk generally about how important it is to be an environmental justice warrior, or you could get a group of people to charge a hill for you because there's an example of some wrong that needs to be righted. And that group, once you get a person who feels in their heart something and charges that hill, you have them forever. And I think that's a very important thing. That's almost all change happens. It's something that touches people emotionally, and they therefore put themselves out to do something. And I think finding those issues, and there are unfortunately plenty of them in our community, but finding them and organizing it and charging the hill, win or lose, you win. I know lots of groups that charge hills they're never going to prevail on, but they realize that the advantage of organizing is a long-term advantage that is never lost. So organizing through a sort of something that is tangible and emotional and very defensible and you know, righteous.
I would say that in that vein, one of the things that we could do is balance out leadership and fellowship. Because I have been the trailblazer warrior to bring up the difficult thing that has to be fixed, and have had the courage to, you know, have a bunch of rocks thrown at me and you hang in there. But what you really are yearning for is someone to have the courage to be the first follower, and that could be taught. So my good friend Bob Drew from Echo B, who sponsored, he sent me a video earlier this week, and it was the dancing man who was dancing all crazy in the park by himself, but there was, you know, groups of people around. They were just in the park in the afternoon, and then someone joined them, and they started dancing crazy. And the first thing that the leader had to do was embrace the next person who had the courage to follow and see them as an equal. And then once they got one more person to do that, now it wasn't just this individual person, it's a crowd of people. And we have a tendency to tell young people, be a leader, be a leader. But no one talks about being a supportive follower and helping to recruit others who believe the same thing. And I think that's something that we should focus on a whole lot more than we're doing.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to say we're getting close to 7. So for all the participants, as I mentioned, we're going to be sending an email out with resources on environmental justice and things that you guys can do in your own communities. We're also going to include a survey in that email. But right now, to get some immediate feedback from you guys, I'm going to go ahead and activate a poll. If you guys could answer that for me, that would be awesome. And I'll leave that poll on. If the panelists have anything else left to say or anything that you guys would like to add in the next minute or two, that would be awesome.
I would just like to just jump in and just thank everybody for coming. And in terms of environmental justice, one of the questions that we didn't get a chance to talk about is how innovation can possibly help us to solve some of these issues. And so I'm hoping that in future conversations that we might have, I mean, this is such a huge topic and there's so many different ways we could have talked about it and how we could discuss individual examples and everything, but that could be something that we could propose to discuss in the future. And, you know, wanted to see anybody from the panel here if they had thought about how innovation can maybe help solve some of these environmental justice issues that we're currently dealing with.
Well, yes, I think innovation and technology is a big part of the solution set that we have to visit. And I also think that the technology we need doesn't have to be invented, it already exists. We simply have to learn a bit about it. We have to look at where it could be deployed. We have to look at who it could help. And then as Mayor Gelber talked about, tie the effort to at an individual level that will resonate with people who will be willing to participate and support an effort. That's also scalable.
So any last remarks from anyone?
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you guys. We want to thank you guys all. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to EcoV and Go Green EcoBins for being our sponsors for tonight. It always means a lot when we have sponsors, and please follow us on social media to see all of our programming. And once again, thank you everybody for participating. Again, thank you so much to the panelists. You guys were amazing. Your answers were eye-opening. I've learned a lot tonight, and I hope people that participated learned. And Julius, thank you so much. You did amazing. Good job. Great co-moderator. And thank you,
Julius
guys.
rocks.
Thank you.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.